disclosed to researchers. Janina's husband, Henry, corresponded with Hayas and with other organizations, urging them to help Janina leave Poland. The letters that we accessed mentioned Janina's wartime alias that she used after the war. And so our research continued. The wartime records, the archival records, revealed that Janina's accomplishments were even more astonishing than she claimed in her memoir. For example, in August 1943, Janina persuaded the SS to release Polish peasants from the camp, from Majdanek. These were Poles whom the German authorities brutally expelled from their homes. Those Poles, those Polish peasants who were considered able-bodied, were drafted for forced labor. And the rest, who were mainly women, mainly children and older people, they lingered in Majdanek under horrible conditions. Out of the 3,600 peasants, a little over 2,100, so those who were alive by that time, were released from Majdanek. They were starved, they were sick, and 200 of them died soon afterwards, after leaving the camp. But still, about 1,900 Polish peasants survived thanks to Janina. But Janina did not really view this as a success story. Why? Probably because she was not able to rescue all of those peasants that she intended to. And she did not include this effort in her memoir. Again, we discovered it in archival documents. Based on just the wartime records, we were able to document that Janina negotiated the release from captivity of close to 10,000 Poles. But again, it's impossible to estimate how many actually survived because of her relief and resistance efforts. Now, who was this Countess Janina Suchodolska before she assumed the false identity of a Polish aristocrat? Janina grew up in a small town called Żurawno in the multi-ethnic, multi-religious, multilingual borderlands in what is today Ukraine and what used to be, between the two world wars, Poland. Janina's father used to be a wealthy landowner, and he mingled with the Polish nobility. Janina absorbed the languages, mannerisms, and customs of the upper classes. As an adult, she joined the intellectual circles of the big city, Lvov, today Lviv, in Ukraine. Her language skills, her ability to operate in a non-Jewish environment, combined with her creativity and intelligence, all that later helped her perform her false identity, survive, and fool the German authorities. It was by chance that Janina and Henry fled from Lvov to Lublin. In December 1941, a family friend, Count Andrzej Skrzyński, whom you see here in the photographs, arrived in Lvov with a mission to smuggle out the Mehlbergs. Once they arrived in Lublin, Skrzyński gave them the false identities of Countess Janina Suchodolska and Count Piotr Suchodolski. Andrzej Skrzyński was the Mehlbergs' rescuer. He was the one who also enabled Janina to engage in her relief, resistance, and rescue efforts. After the war, Janina decided that it was still too dangerous to reveal her identity to the Polish communist rulers. As Dr. Janina Suchodolska, social worker, she became a leader in Poland's social welfare organization. On the other hand, Henry returned to his pre-war identity and resumed his academic career. The photos that you see here show a rare occasion when Janina, Henry, and Henry's two surviving brothers and their wives were able to reunite. But soon, rising anti-Semitic violence in Poland made them realize that they had to get out of Poland. In her new role as a social worker, Janina traveled around Poland, witnessing the miserable situation of the Polish population. And as part of a United Nations fellowship that she received, she traveled around the United States to learn new approaches to child care, child welfare. And her visits were documented in local press, and the examples of which you see here on these two slides. While in the United States, Janina also did something else. She made contacts with various professors to help Henry leave Poland, and she managed to do that. In 1949, Henry left not for the United States, but for Canada. Janina managed to escape from Poland in 1950. She joined Henry in Canada, this time as Dr. Josephine Janina Spinner Mehlberg, mathematician. The Mehlbergs lived in Canada for 6 years, and without family members or children of their own, they forged substitute families with their pre-war friends who also settled in Canada, just as other Holocaust survivors did. In 1956, Janina and Henry settled in Chicago, and each pursued academic paths. Henry as a professor of philosophy at the University of Chicago, and Janina as a professor of mathematics at the Illinois Institute of Technology. And on these photos, you see her teaching a class at the institute. This was an exceptional position for a woman, for her as a woman and an immigrant in a male-dominated field. No one except her closest friends, who had been Holocaust survivors, knew about the remarkable story that she recorded on paper.
So, when we got together on this, our original plan had been to publish the memoir along with some text explaining the historical context. But after we realized that the memoir, which only covers the wartime years, doesn't do justice to her amazing life, we realized we needed to write Janina's biography. Our main source for the wartime years is her memoir, though, and it enables us to tell that part of the story largely from her perspective, incorporating her observations, thoughts, even the conversations that she recounted. There are many riveting scenes in the memoir, including when she saved Henry from a mass shooting and the 2 times she narrowly escaped arrest by the Gestapo. I'm going to read a passage from the book now that's based on her account of her and Henry's flight from Lvov to Lublin with Count Szkynski. This was a very dangerous journey because they had to travel without any identity papers, since Jews were not allowed to travel. After 3 days and 3 nights, they arrived at Lublin. Hoping to slip out of the station quickly without encountering any police checks, the men went to retrieve the luggage while Janina sought a cab. She found one easily, then waited with increasing anxiety, straining for a sight of Henry and the Count, while the cab driver complained about losing other fares. Finally, nearly an hour later, she saw Count Szkynski approach. He was alone. "You and I are going home now," he said, taking her arm. "Henry was detained by some German police for something, and he'll come after us." Janina broke away from him and ran back into the station. There she saw Henry being berated by a German official who was shouting that taking any baggage out of Galicia was strictly prohibited. Henry looked pale. At any moment, the official would demand to see his papers. Janina sprang into action. "What do you want of my husband?" she demanded in German as she stepped in front of Henry and fixed the official with a haughty look. Startled by her peremptory tone and apparent lack of fear, The official lost his swagger and replied in a lower voice, "He has broken a strict regulation on baggage." "He could do no such thing," Janina retorted, "because when we left Wolf, there was no such regulation." The official backed down and said lamely, "Anyway, he has to pay a fine." If they agreed to the fine, Janina realized, they would have to show papers so it could be recorded. "We are not going to pay any fine," she declared firmly, "because there was no regulation about this, and if you will put through a call to Wolf, you will hear it for yourself." Now, flustered and fuming, the official ordered them to get out, "and don't let me catch you another time." Careful not to give away their relief, Janina and Henry sauntered out of the station with their 2 bags. Never has a harshly bellowed order sounded so sweet, Janina thought. Decades later, she would reflect on the lesson she learned in this encounter, and that she would use again and again to save lives in the years that followed it. What do you do with your fear and trembling in a confrontation with a swaggering bully? You confine it to the small prison of the heart, letting none seep into the muscles of the eyes, hands, or legs. You quake within and show calm authority without. You pull off a hoax. You must not toady to them. You must not let them sniff blood. Composure and coolness toward them implied the backing of power, and in the face of power, they might very well shrink. 3 days earlier, Peppy Mehlberg had departed Wolf for Lublin. Countess Janina Suchodolska arrived there in her place. Now I'd like to share a few insights that we gained from Janina's memoir into her character and her motivations. So she was not fearless, as this passage I just read shows. What she was tremendously compassionate and empathetic, and that's what drove her devotion to saving as many lives as she could. Her empathy told her what the prisoners at Majdanek needed to survive was not just food, but hope, and she tried to give them that in many ways. And her compassion spurred her to try to extend that hope even to prisoners who she knew had broken under torture and turned informant. Henry wrote that Janina's actions during the war were based on a simple mathematical principle. One life has a lower value than many lives, and her own life would be worth nothing if she did not use it to save others. Henry also said that Janina's memoir was her testimony. It testifies not just to what she experienced, but also to the lessons that she drew from observing human nature in the most horrible conditions imaginable in occupied Poland. And she wrote very movingly of the terrible choices that the occupation forced people to make, as in this passage. What would a mother do in the face of the impossible choices put to her? There was one who, with her daughter, hid in the wardrobes of her apartment during a raid. They found her daughter, but not her. The child sobbed and screamed for her mother to save her. The mother kept silent and survived. I know this from the mother herself, who, sobbing out her story, wished herself dead instead of condemned to live with this memory. Another mother hid with her son in a bunker. Her son ventured out at the wrong time. He was seized and shot right there. The mother heard and remained silent. A young Jewish woman was offered the privilege of choosing whether her mother or her husband would be executed the next day. A father was offered his life on condition he stand and watch his son being hanged, and smiled all the while. If the smile left his face, he would be hanged too. He kept smiling. And who is to judge the impulse to survive? Now, years later, I try not to judge, but simply to report, since we who continue as members of the human race are obliged to know its capacities, however grim and unbearable the knowledge may be. But knowledge is not the same as enduring, and I am not sure that knowledge alone gives us the right to judge. The mystery is too great, how we respond to unbearable demands, because while physical and psychic tortures broke many, some reacted with what one can only call moral grandeur. I know some, and heard of many others, who helped their fellow sufferers at the cost of their own lives, who confessed to others' crimes, who willingly chose death over a degrading life. So the murder of goodness was not thorough, and this fact, too, must be reported. Janina wrote about enemies, people she knew were participating in terrible crimes, and yet who took risks to help her and even save her. And she was well aware that some of the Poles who risked their lives alongside her, whom she rescued, who lit candles and said prayers for the safety of Countess Suchodolska, might have despised her or done worse had they known that she was a Jew. And her specialty as a mathematician was probability, and she was constantly calculating the risks of her actions. She discovered that she could not predict how a person would react, whether that person would harm her or help her in a given situation, based just on that person's ethnicity, religion, or ideology. And she came to see that none of us is completely defined by either the worst or the best that we do. And so she didn't judge. She approached each person as a fellow member of what she called the vast, suffering human family. And if they were suffering, then she thought it her human duty to help them. And if they were despairing, she tried to give them hope.
Janina's memoir is really an invaluable testimony of one woman's survival during the Holocaust. And from it, we learn about how her rescue was organized and arranged. But we also learn how Janina arranged the rescue of other people. We learn about her motivations to endanger her life even more so that she could help those whom she could, non-Jewish Poles. And only then, she reasoned, her life and survival had a purpose. Janina witnessed the beginning and end of the largest mass murder operation of the Holocaust. But her memoir is also a testimony about the suffering and persecution of non-Jewish Poles under German occupation. The German authorities pursued their anti-Polish policy with brutality and determination. They destroyed and looted Polish national and cultural treasures. They conducted mass shootings of members of the Polish intelligentsia. They put millions of Poles into forced labor, and they conducted bloody ethnic cleansing and reprisal campaigns. And through Janina's lens, through this Polish Jewish woman's lens, we learn how the Polish people resisted Nazi oppression and how they sought to help each other survive. And Janina played a major role in those efforts. Barry and I are both professional Holocaust historians. Over the course of our respective work, we've read numerous testimonies, memoirs, diaries. We listened to many oral histories, and neither of us has ever encountered a story like that of Janina's. Janina's story is unique in that as a Jew trying to survive under a false identity, she managed to rescue thousands of non-Jews, and she negotiated with top Nazis to enlarge the scope and scale of relief for non-Jewish Poles. But the story of every Holocaust victim is unique. Their stories reveal the terror, the horror, the almost unimaginable suffering of Jews that Jews had to go through. But they are also stories of family, of faith, of resistance, of resilience. We need these stories to remind us of our common humanity with the 6 million and to show us the danger that we all face when we fail to confront hate and protect the dignity of other people. This International Holocaust Remembrance Day, we honor Janina Mehlberg. We hope that readers of our book will be inspired by the selfless courage in the face of unspeakable cruelty. It has taken 80 years for Janina's story to be told. And we wonder, and we ask ourselves, how many other stories of Holocaust victims and survivors await to be told? Their stories deserve to be known, and the world needs their stories. Thank you.
Our favorite part, questions.
If you have a question, let me get the microphone over to you so everybody can hear. Yes.
After the war, were any of the people who she saved, did they become aware that she was Jewish? And if so, how did they react to that?
No, they never knew, no.
Thank you. So she functioned as a mathematics professor, yet her training wasn't that. So are we to assume she was self-taught, or had she gone back for other education?
No, thank you for that question. She had studied mathematics and got a master's degree in Lvov. She studied actually under two of the leading mathematicians in Europe at that time, Stepan Banach and Hugo Steinhaus. And with Steinhaus, that's how she became an expert on probability. But she wanted to go on for a PhD, and that was almost impossible to do for a woman in math. So instead, she studied under this very charismatic philosopher, Kazimierz Twardowski, who founded this special intellectual movement in which mathematicians were very involved. Henry, for example, was a philosopher of physics. So his collected works are Time, Causality, and the Quantum Method. So this was a very rich interchange of highly developed intellects. So she actually specialized in math for her PhD in philosophy, and she wrote her dissertation on mathematical reasoning and traditional logic. And she argued that the rules of traditional logic are insufficient for mathematical reasoning, which has to draw on other forms of thought as well, particularly imagination and intuition. And she put all of those to use when she was seeking to save lives during World War II. Yes, you have a question. She's coming with Thank you so much. Yes, here we have it.
I have two quick questions. One is, in her original autobiography, did she talk at all about survivor's guilt? And secondly, what happened to the Count?
Oh, okay. No, she did not. She did not write much of anything about her perspective as a Jew. we think that she only wrote this memoir in the 1960s, and we think that she wrote it for a Polish audience. She wrote it in Polish. Henry translated it, but her English was fine. She could have done it. It was as good as Henry's. So we think that she was aiming it for a Polish audience at that time to counter increasing anti-Semitism, and particularly the official anti-Semitic narrative of the Holocaust, which was that all the Poles heroically tried to save the Jews, and the Jews went like sheep to the slaughter, or they were cowardly, and then the ones who survived repaid their their rescuers with calumny. So here is a story of a Jew who was a Polish patriot who risked her life to save Poles. And she also really wrote about the people in her organization, her relief organization, the RGO, which was also discredited by the communists, partly because there were a lot of aristocrats who ran it, and the communists rightly suspected that many of them were involved, like Janina, in the anti-communist resistance. So that was its accomplishments were basically covered over. So she was, shining the spotlight on what that organization had done, and on the real bravery and contributions of her co-workers to the survival of Poles.
Perhaps her only real regret that we could sense from the memoir was that she could not help more people. And that's why I mentioned that the situation with the Polish peasants, right, which she does not include in her memoir. And that is an indication of a regret for not having done more, although she was doing so much and risking her life every day. In terms of, thank you for the question about the Count Andrzej Skrzyński. After liberation, which in Lublin in eastern Poland occurred in the summer of 1944, so earlier than other areas of Poland were liberated in 1945, right? Almost immediately afterwards, Andrzej Skrzyński was accused of being of collaborating, that his organization, the Main Welfare Council, was collaborating with the German authorities. I'm sorry? Right, that's what I'm saying, yes. Yes. Right. Right, well, okay. Well, Andrzej Skrzyński was the head of the Main Welfare Council for the Lublin district. His title was advisor to the governor, the German general governor, right? And after the war, he was accused of being this collaborator. So he could not stomach that, right? And he decided to leave Lublin. In his place, Janina took over the relief activities. We don't know much about what happened to Andrzej Skrzyński after the war. He did not write anything about what he did during the war. He did not write a memoir. When we contacted his granddaughter, she was not even aware that he was a rescuer of 2 Jews. That was news to her. We know that after the war in the 1940s and even going into the 1950s, 60s, Janina was in touch with Skrzyński's family. In fact, we know that she also supported financially the family in gratitude for what Skrzyński did for her and for her husband Henry. And Skrzyński is not recognized as a righteous among the nations. We hope that he will be.
Thank you so much for your presentation. Towards the end of your talk, you talked about our responsibility in today's world. And I wondered if you have any comments about the relationship between
I think you make a very interesting point about the complexities of Holocaust and World War II history. One of the historical events that we write about in the book concerns the massacres of the Polish people that were perpetrated by members of a Ukrainian nationalist organization. This is a very thorny topic in Polish-Ukrainian relations until today. About even as many as 100,000 Poles were murdered in a genocidal campaign by Ukrainians. This is a matter of scholarship on the Polish side, on the Ukrainian side. And when it comes to today, I think the support from Poland for Ukrainian refugees shows also how Polish people can look beyond the history, right? Look for ways to connect to one another, to their neighbors.
I was wondering if you could tell us how she came up with her title and her name, and wasn't she ever questioned about that title? How did she come up with the Countess and when she changed her name?
Count Shkinsky got her and her husband their false identity papers. He was in the resistance as well as in the RGO. And we don't know exactly how that happened. And we don't know whether there was a Countess Janina Suchodolska, a real person whose identity Janina was using, or whether that was a made-up name. Well, we haven't been able to find a real Janina Suchodolska, so we don't know. Apparently not. I mean, Shkinsky vouched for her, and then he got her, they were able to find living quarters with two elderly Polish aristocratic neighbors, and so they were just ushered into the noble society there in Lublin, and they were supposedly from somewhere else, and apparently nobody questioned it.
That in order for Janina to work for the Polish relief organization, her papers had to be strong, and she had to present that her kind of non-Jewish background, right? And somehow, we don't know how, because we do not have access to the people who could tell us about it or the sources from which we could learn about this. But somehow the documents that Count Andrzej Skrzyński procured were so strong and so credible that even when Janina had to show up in a German office to confirm them, that they passed muster.
Any other questions for our authors this afternoon? If not, I would like to thank you all so much for attending today. And of course, thank you to Dr. White and Dr. Sliwa for joining us and sharing this story. We do have the Learned Owl here today. They are selling copies of the Counterfeit Countess. If you'd like to purchase a copy, they're in the back here. And our authors will also be in the back if you
Thank you very much.